Today we're going to take a look at the Taurus Model 62C. Now before we get started, I'm going to point out that I had a little problems with the battery on target cam with the cooler weather here today. So I don't have target cam footage for the first set of range videos. Though I am leaving those in the video because I think they are a good example of how the firearm functions and an example of the reliability, or commenting on the reliability of the firearm and how it functions. Now this video was filmed at the beautiful Banner Range today, and while it was a little cooler, the weather was still plenty nice enough to where Banner was busy like always, so you're going to have to contend with some background noise. And now, let's hit the range. We are out at Banner Range here today, and what we're going to do is do a little quick review on this Taurus. This is the Model 62C, which I believe they call the carbine version. It has a 16.5-inch barrel. They do also have the 62R, which has a 23.5-inch barrel. Same capacity though. They say 13 rounds because I'm just going to put 10 in. Hopefully that's, I think the we're going to find out. I'm going to aim at the center of our target here. Let's see how we do. This is at 25 yards. That's it. What I'll probably do after these 10 is shift over to the critter course, and we'll see how we can do on the critter course. Kind of a pain when you need to unload your firearm, in my opinion, because then you got to drop the hammer. Alright, let's see if we can shift over if the critter course is open. When I noticed target cam had died on me, I put a fresh battery in and I was able to get us a picture of our target here. What we can see with the Browning ammo that we were shooting today is I think we have a group that is consistently 2 inches to the left and 2 inches high of the bullseye where I was aiming. The Taurus Model 62C is 32.5 inches long, 4.315 inches high, 1.457 inches wide, and weighs in at 80 ounces. It is made of steel with a hardwood stock and grip. Now the finish, it was available in blued, stainless steel like you see in this video, as well as a case hardened finish. I never got to see the case hardened one in person. If I would have, we probably would have got that one instead, I suspect. The version that we're shooting here today is the 62C. which has the 16.5-inch barrel. Taurus also made the 62R, which had a 23.5-inch barrel. And it probably weighed a little more than the C version as well as a result. The R version, at least where I lived, was more common. And I think the reason we got the C version was because we thought it looked a little cooler. But that's just us. I suspect many other people probably gravitated towards the R version, which probably had a little better sight picture, but not much. The Taurus Model 62 is a clone of the Winchester Model 62, which was in production between 1932 and 1958. As a result, that means that this design has been in production now for going on 90 years between not only Winchester, but the various other companies since that have made it, like say Rossi and Taurus as well. Rossi made it up until Taurus acquired Rossi, which is when they discontinued their version of it. One of the noticeable differences between the Taurus version, the Rossi version, and the Winchester version comes down to the pump on them. The Taurus versions have the shorter carbine length pump, which has 13 grooves in it, compared to the 16 or 17 on the others. The fans of the line will be able to tell the difference right off the bat. I just read that off some websites and I'm passing it along. Now, some additional features that the Model 62 has are a manual safety on top of the action, which has a F and S for F for fire, S for safe. You can also put the hammer at half cock to lock the trigger and the pump. The hammer also has a hammer lock on it, very similar to what are featured on other Taurus 22 firearms. And other manufacturers like Smith & Wesson also have similar safety locks on some of their revolvers. The Model 62 can also be broken in half, very similar to some of, say, the Ruger takedown models that are now popular today. Before we talk more about the Model 62, how about a little more range time? Let's see if we can hit any squirrels. We hit one. There we go. See if I can hit the hanging swinger on the left. Move to the right. Got that. A little high. Now the gun on the left. And the spinner on the far right. Now let's put 10 more in.
But because I don't want, I'm not gonna shoot at the blue, you know, from this lane,
Yeah,
right?
you cannot.
That's what.
No cross.
So should I wait until?
Yeah, unfortunately, this. Here, he's got his own target. If you want to shoot at that one, you can. Move this over here. Can if you want to. Okay. That's all my position. I mean, it's tough to shoot at, but.
Around.
Thank you. So just.
Again, when we move, lock that one. When you move from station to station, lock that one. That's it, done. Does it have a lock on the other side there?
As we see, the Model 62 can be a very fun and actually a quite reliable firearm. One thing that would probably surprise many people is the Model 62 is one firearm that I get asked about the most. And I get asked about it in quite interesting ways. Between when I'm on, say, Zoom calls and someone asks, "What's that little pump 410 on the wall behind you?" And I have to go, no, that's a pump 22. And it seems foreign to them because to many people who are not firearms enthusiasts, the only 22 that they are aware of that exists is, say, a 1022. The other area that I get a lot of questions or comments about it is when I bring it to the range occasionally. Again, many people, even if, say, they're familiar with the Henry rifles and the bolt actions and all that, they rarely if ever see a pump action 22, which was actually quite common, say, 100 years ago. Now, my Model 62, it is ammo sensitive in that occasionally I will run into a brand of ammunition that it does not feed. It has something to do with there's a range of lengths of 22 ammunition that it likes, and at least on mine, if I get outside of that range, it just does not work. Now, one thing I will point out, and it's something I also have to point out when I take shooters to shoot a Henry rifle, is in 22, and I think a lot of it has to do with how, and if you shoot a lot of 22, you're going to know what I mean here, is there are times where that projectile is sort of wiggly in the shell casing. There's a little bit of, say, wiggle on the bullet in the brass. And in something like a lever action or a pump, if you baby that, you know, like you think you're going to break it, so you, it's like, I just want to, it's going to jam every time on you when you get one of those jiggle rounds. And in a bulk box or whatever, it's not uncommon for most of them to be those jiggle rounds. So the point of the story is you can't baby them. You're not going to break it by working the lever hard, working the pump hard. So just go to town on it. Now we're going to take a moment here and we are going to cover the difference between a bolt action, a lever action, and a pump action. Here's why I'm including this.
Do you like those lever rifles? Those 22 levers? Sure.
This is not the first time that someone has asked me about how I like my lever action pump 22. And I think a lot of that comes down to many people now are not used to seeing or the idea of a pump 22, and so they're not sure what action to call it. They know it's not a semi-auto, they know it's not a bolt action. The only other one they probably heard of is lever action, so it must be a lever action. Well, let's show the difference between those now. This is an example of a bolt action firearm. Now this firearm is empty, and it happens to be magazine fed, which there's no magazine in this one, or I should say detachable box magazine fed. There's no magazine in this firearm. If there were a loaded magazine in this firearm, when the bolt is pushed forward, a round will be stripped off the top of the magazine, loaded into the chamber. With the bolt then locked down, the firearm is ready to fire. Now you can put the safety on if you'd like. I typically don't, I just keep my hand away from the trigger, so to speak. After firing, or if you need to unload the firearm, in either condition, the way you unload the firearm is unlock the bolt, pull the bolt to the rear. That will eject your either spent cartridge or your unfired round. Now if you leave the magazine in and it is a loaded magazine, pushing the bolt forward will then strip the next round off the magazine, load it into the chamber. With the bolt locked, you could then fire the firearm again, repeat to unload, and continue firing until your magazine is empty. This is a bolt action firearm. This is an example of a lever action rifle. This is a not auto loading rifle, which means that every time that you need to cycle the action, you need to manually do so. That is done via this lever, which you've probably seen in, say, a Western cinema. Lever goes forward, that will eject the spent cartridge, or if you have not fired the firearm, it will eject the unfired round. When the lever is then closed, if you have additional rounds in, say in this case we have a tube magazine, if there are more rounds in the tube magazine, a round would be fed into the chamber, And as you can see, the hammer is also cocked. This firearm is ready to fire. If you're not ready to fire, but you have a round in the chamber, you can lower the hammer, in which case pulling the trigger will then do nothing. When you are ready to fire at that point, you can then manually cock the hammer and fire when ready. Now, one nice feature of lever actions, much like bolt actions, is even if, say, in this case, my firearm is cocked, if I need to unload my firearm, I can just open the lever, the unspent cartridge will be ejected, and I can then remove my tube magazine, dump out any further rounds, and safely empty the firearm without needing to pull the trigger. That's a very nice thing, an important safety feature to some people. So again, this is a not auto reloading rifle. Reloading of the rifle is done via this lever, hence lever action. Much like the previous two firearms we looked at, this firearm is not auto reloading. To reload it, you need to manually cycle the action. That is done via this pump, hence pump action. Now this is very similar in concept to, say, a pump action shotgun, like many people would be familiar with, if not from hunting or recreational use. They've probably seen it in movies and cinema at this point. Now this pump action is not the same as, say, on a pump action shotgun, but the idea is the same. To reload or load the firearm, you need to cycle the action, which is done using this pump. You work the pump to the rear to unload any loaded or spent cartridge, and then pushing the action, the pump, to the forward will load the next round. This happens to be, again, a tubular magazine-fed firearm. If there was another round in the magazine here, pushing the pump forward would load that round into the chamber, and as you can see, the hammer in this case is back. This firearm is ready to fire. In similar fashion to our lever action firearm, we can manually drop the hammer if we need to, in which case pulling the trigger will do nothing. When we are ready to fire this firearm, we can manually cock the hammer and fire when ready. And just like with the lever action, we can unload the firearm if needed by working the pump. That will eject the unspent round if it was loaded, though keep in mind again, if there are additional rounds in the tube magazine, pushing the pump forward will load that next round. So make sure if you are unloading the firearm that you also account for any rounds in your tube magazine. Now, one point that I'm going to point out here on at least my version of the Model 62, and I don't know if this is how all of them worked or if the original Winchesters were this way. You'll notice here with the hammer back, I cannot work the pump. And I believe that is for stability purposes. When you're lining up a shot, if you're trying to sort of squeeze, snug the firearm up into you, if you were able to do so and the pump moved, you could basically unload the firearm when you are trying to actually get on target. So as a byproduct of that pump locking, what that means is that if you do need to unload the firearm, you need to first manually drop the hammer, which requires pulling the trigger while controlling the hammer. After dropping the hammer, you can safely unload it by working the pump, and then of course, as I've said, dumping out your tube magazine. For the conclusion to this video, let's talk about the one thing that a lot of people are probably turned off about, and that's the name Taurus at the front of the name of this firearm. There are a lot of people that tell third-hand stories negatively on Taurus. Now, that's not to say that they're the best manufacturer in the world. As long as I've been alive, I can think of at least a couple times where they have earned that questionable quality control reputation that they sort of have now. Though there have also been numerous occasions where I have acquired a budget firearm with a Taurus name on it, and it has far outperformed its price point. Now I think this Model 62 is an example of that. This is I think we got it for maybe $229 years ago. Looking at Taurus's website, they still sell them from anywhere from $219 to $299. So the price really hasn't changed that much. And I think if you temper your expectations to meet the price point, you can be pleasantly surprised. This firearm, it doesn't feel cheap. I don't see anywhere where there's any nicks or mars in the finish. It has what looks like to me a very nice looking hardwood stock for what's on a $300 22. Now, is it a fantastic firearm? No, it does have some flaws. As I've mentioned, it is a little ammo sensitive. If I happen to run across one that's just a little outside of the length, it just does not function. But on the flip side, with ammo that it does function, it performs every bit as well and every bit as reliably as things like my Henry rifles and, well, I don't want to say my bolt action because those are basically without fail, but any of my other non-bolt action manual cycled firearms, they're right up there with them, these Pump 22s are. They're a lot of fun. In many ways they feel like a throwback to a different style of Western. Now, they were more common 100 years ago than they are today, and I still think that they are good firearms, though they do have some challenges, like we pointed out with needing to drop the hammer to be able to work the pump, that I think, say, a lever action sort of outperforms them. Now, in terms of reloading, with, say, my Henry rifle and my Model 62, they have basically what we're going to call the same tube magazine. And as a result, neither one of them can I reload any faster than the other. With fumble fingers, you're only as quick reloading those as you can get the little rounds into that little loading gate. And that's just the nature of 22 tube-fed magazines. Now, all in all, I do think the Taurus Model 62 is a fun, nice little firearm to have, especially if you're a fan of just general John Moses Browning designed firearms. With this one being based on the Winchester Model 62, which is a John Moses Browning design, if you like his work, well, here's another excuse to get the Taurus Model 62. And hey, it's at a nice price point. Well, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching. And as always, have a good day.